Stop what you are doing. Pause the universe. Because what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is the fundamental blueprint for human betrayal, a catastrophe so enormous it necessitated the descent of God himself just to witness the fallout. This is the Mahabharata. And if you think you know drama, if you think you understand betrayal, you are about to have your entire concept of conflict shattered into a billion pieces. Can you believe a single family quarrel could literally wipe out the greatest civilization Earth had ever known? We are talking about empires that spanned continents, armies that numbered in the millions, warriors who could summon celestial weapons that burned cities to ash with a flick of the wrist. But before the arrows darken the sky over Kurukshetra, before the earth drinks the blood of 1.6 billion soldiers, we have to go back, way back, to the ancient, beautiful, and utterly cursed lineage that gave birth to both the heroes and the monsters of this epic saga. Our journey begins with a choice, the ultimate choice between duty and desire, a choice made by a king so blinded by his own sorrow that he set the doom clock ticking for generations yet unborn. Meet King Shantanu. Shantanu was powerful, wise, and ruled the Kuru kingdom with unmatched glory. He had everything a mortal could desire, except one thing: true, unadulterated passion. One day, wandering the banks of the sacred Ganges River, he saw her, not a woman, but a vision of ethereal, otherworldly beauty, Ganga. She was not of this world. She was the personification of the river itself, a celestial being bound by rules we mortals could never comprehend. Shantanu was instantly captivated, throwing aside every rule of royal decorum and demanding her hand in marriage. Ganga agreed, but her agreement came with a terrifying, non-negotiable condition, a condition that serves as the first colossal crack in the foundation of the Kuru dynasty. You must never, ever question my actions, not my words, not my deeds. If you do, I leave. Shantanu, drunk on love and blinded by lust, readily agreed. A catastrophe no one saw coming? It was signed in blood the moment he put that crown of silence upon his own head. He chose temporary happiness over eternal wisdom, and the cosmic price was about to be paid. Stop! What in the name of the heavens are you doing? Who are you? You are a demon. You are destroying my lineage. The moment the words left his mouth, the vow was broken. The universe held its breath. Ganga paused, her face unreadable, her celestial eyes burning with ancient sorrow. You broke the promise, King. I must now leave you. But before she vanished into the river mists, she revealed the dark truth of the 7 lost children. They were the celestial Vasus, cursed to be born on earth as mortals. Ganga, the river, had merely acted as the agent of their release from mortal bondage. But the 8th child, the one Shantanu saved, he was cursed more profoundly than the rest. He would live, yes, but he would suffer. And his life would become the ultimate sacrifice, the foundation upon which the entire Kurukshetra War would eventually be built. His name was Devavrata, and his story is where the true descent into chaos begins. He was left with his father, a king broken by love and debt. Devavrata grew into a warrior of staggering power, a master of every weapon and every scripture. He was the crown jewel, the hope, the guaranteed future of the Kuru throne. But fate, as always in this epic, demanded more blood. Shantanu, once again, found himself a lonely old king, yearning for companionship. And once again, desire walked across his path in the form of a young, beautiful fisherwoman named Satyavati. This time, the condition was political, not magical. Satyavati's father, a powerful chieftain, demanded that only the son born of Satyavati would ascend the throne. Devavrata, the rightful heir, had to be removed from the line of succession. The king, old and weak, was devastated. How could he betray the son he had fought so hard to save? How could he deny the kingdom its greatest leader? But the pull of desire, the need for one last taste of earthly love, was too strong. Devavrata saw his father's suffering, and in an act of breathtaking, terrifying self-sacrifice, an act that ripples through all of history, he stepped forward and made a vow that defined his life and damned his family forever. I, Devavrata, renounce my right to the throne. I vow to never become king. This was magnificent, noble, and satisfied the chieftain. But the chieftain, sensing hesitation, pressed further. What if Devavrata's children claimed the throne? The mighty warrior looked into the eyes of his father, the man whose weakness had cursed him, and made the ultimate, devastating pledge, a vow so grand, so terrifyingly complete, that the very cosmos showered flowers upon him and renamed him Bhishma, the Terrible. I vow to remain celibate for my entire life. I will never marry. I will never father a child. My line ends with me. A catastrophe no one saw coming? Bhishma just guaranteed that the Kuru dynasty would never have a clear, undisputed line of succession ever again. He severed his own future to satisfy his father's fleeting desire. He became the eternal caretaker, the perfect soldier, the pillar that held up a roof built entirely of rotting wood. And in that terrifying, silent sacrifice, the seeds of the Great War were sown. Because when there is no legitimate heir, when the path to power is muddied by eternal vows and broken promises, the stage is set not for kingship, but for catastrophic rivalry. And the rivalry begins in the next part, with the birth of two opposing factions, the 100 Kauravas and the 5 Pandavas. Stay tuned, because the chess game is about to begin. The stage was set by Bhishma's magnificent, crippling sacrifice. But the true curse of Hastinapura began not with a battle cry, but with a desperate midnight pact. King Vichitravirya, the recipient of Bhishma's protection, died young, childless, leaving the Kuru dynasty facing extinction. The weight of the world fell upon Satyavati, the fisherwoman queen, who had sacrificed everything for the throne, and she now had to break every rule of propriety to save her lineage. She summoned her secret, terrifying son, the great sage Vyasa, the very man who would one day compile this entire epic, to perform the ancient, dangerous rite of niyoga, to father heirs upon the widowed queens. This was not a pleasant act. Vyasa, the ascetic, was rough, intense, and utterly unnerving. The queens, paralyzed by terror and revulsion, doomed their offspring before they were even conceived. Queen Ambika, wife to the late king, closed her eyes in pure, reflexive horror the moment she saw the sage. Her son, though powerful and destined for sovereignty, was born entirely blind. Dhritarashtra, the physical manifestation of the dynasty's fatal inability to see the truth. Queen Ambalika, upon meeting Vyasa, turned pale as death. Her child, Pandu, was born perpetually sickly and pale. Pandu means pale. a physical weakness, but a moral strength. And finally, the maidservant, who replaced the queens for a third attempt, remained steady and calm, giving birth to Vidura, the wisest man in the kingdom, the incarnation of Dharma itself, yet barred from the throne by his birth status. 3 sons, 3 pillars, built upon a foundation of terror and flawed sight. Dhritarashtra, though the eldest, was disqualified from ruling outright due to his blindness, a profound blow to his ego that would fester for a lifetime. Thus, the pale, sickly Pandu took the reins of the world's greatest kingdom, Hastinapura, while his blind older brother watched from the shadows, consuming himself with resentment. This cosmic irony forced Pandu to abdicate the magnificent throne he had just claimed. He retreated to the deepest forests with his 2 wives, Kunti and Madri, surrendering the seat of power back to the blind Dhritarashtra, who became the king regent, savoring the power he felt was rightfully his, even temporary. Faced with her husband's curse and the necessity of producing heirs for the Kuru line, Kunti used the mantra. She first invoked Dharma, the god of justice, and bore Yudhishthira, the embodiment of truth and righteousness. Next, she called upon Vayu, the mighty wind god, giving birth to the colossal, impossibly strong Bhima. And for the third and most crucial son, she invoked Indra, the king of the heavens, resulting in Arjuna, the peerless archer, whose skill would define the coming war. Kunti then shared the boon with her co-wife, Madri, who invoked the Ashwins, the twin celestial physicians, who fathered the beautiful twin warriors, Nakula and Sahadeva. The 5 Pandava brothers, the celestial, virtuous children, were born in the tranquility of the forest, pure and protected by the gods themselves. Meanwhile, back in the lavish, corrupt palace of Hastinapura, the birth of the rivals was a disaster of human malice and ambition. Gandhari, Dhritarashtra's wife, was consumed by jealousy when she learned Kunti had already borne 3 sons. She had been pregnant for an agonizingly long time, 2 years of frustrating waiting. In a fit of rage and impatience, she brutally beat her own stomach, attempting to abort the pregnancy. From these 100 pots emerged the 100 Kaurava brothers, led by the firstborn Duryodhana. The moment this child of ambition, jealousy, and violence arrived, the palace was flooded with terrifying omens. Jackals howled, birds shrieked, and the very air grew heavy with impending doom. The wise men, Bhishma, Vidura, and the elders, implored the blind king Dhritarashtra to abandon this ill-omened child, warning him that Duryodhana was the destined destroyer of the dynasty. But Dhritarashtra's paternal love, magnified by his own blindness and insecurity, refused to acknowledge the darkness. He kept his firstborn, the seed of destruction. This was the core imbalance. 5 divinely born brothers raised in simplicity and righteousness versus 100 human sons raised in the lap of luxury, surrounded by their father's blind favoritism and their own innate, growing resentment. The forest idyll ended abruptly when Pandu succumbed to his curse, dying instantly upon embracing Madri, who then committed sati. Kunti returned to Hastinapura with the 5 small, bewildered Pandava orphans, placing them directly under the care of the king regent, Dhritarashtra. The moment the 5 celestial children entered the palatial gardens, the rivalry became irreversible. Duryodhana looked at the strong, righteous Yudhishthira, the gigantic Bhima, and the impossibly skilled Arjuna, and saw not cousins, but threats. The game of dice, which would lead to the destruction of the world, had begun, and the first throw was the birth itself. The Pandavas were seen as rivals for the throne, while the Kauravas were the undeniable heirs, and Dhritarashtra, blinded by love for his own flesh and blood, ensured that every action, every slight, and every moment of teaching only deepened the rift between the destined warriors. The shadow war for the future of the world was now a playground squabble, infinitely more dangerous because the stakes were truly cosmic. The education, Drona knew, was only a prologue. He had molded the young princes into fighting machines, but now came the ultimate test of character, ingenuity, and focus, the test that would determine who among the Kuru dynasty was truly worthy of the mantle of the warrior elite. He gathered them, not on the practice field, but by a dried-up well in the deepest part of the royal grounds. A simple wooden ball, a small toy, was lost far down the stone throat of the well, an object none of the pampered princes could retrieve. Drona watched their frantic, useless attempts with cold, calculating eyes. Ropes slipped, grappling hooks failed, and their frustration mounted, proving that all their physical strength meant nothing without the surgical precision of the mind. It was a test designed to expose inadequacy, paving the way for the genius of one specific student to shine. Then, with the calm certainty that marked his every movement, Arjuna stepped forward, the third Pandava, whose connection to his bow was rumored to be spiritual. He did not ask for a rope. He asked only for his quiver. With a sound like tearing silk, he shot one arrow that tied itself around the wooden ball deep in the earth's darkness. But that was merely technique. The impossible feat followed. With absolute, terrifying control, Arjuna shot a second arrow that pierced the minuscule tail of the first, then a third that split the tail of the second, creating an unbroken chain of perfectly linked shafts that spanned the distance from his bow to the well's bottom. He slowly pulled the chain, retrieving the ball, proving not only his mastery of physics, but his total dominance over the weapon itself. Drona, the fierce guru, swelled with a terrifying, destructive pride. He had birthed the greatest archer the world would ever know, a weapon destined to change the course of history. But this very moment of triumph also secured the doom of the dynasty. For every impossible feat performed by Arjuna was a fresh, corrosive dose of poison injected directly into the heart of Duryodhana. The princes returned to Hastinapura, their education complete, the political stage now set for their debut. But the air of the court was not one of celebration. It was thick with the scent of treachery and overwhelming favoritism. King Dhritarashtra, though physically blind, remained spiritually blinder still. His destructive, all-consuming love for his eldest son, Duryodhana, distorted his judgment, making him see the Pandavas' virtue and skill not as assets to the throne, but as direct, intolerable threats. Duryodhana was not merely jealous. He was a vessel of pure, cosmic resentment. He saw the adoration showered upon Yudhishthira for his righteousness, the fear inspired by Bhima's strength, and the divine respect earned by Arjuna's godlike skill, and he felt only utter despair. His father's unconditional support, however, gave him license to cultivate this hatred, nurtured tirelessly by the one man who saw chaos as an art form, Shakuni, the wily prince of Gandhara. Shakuni, with his calculating smile and loaded dice, whispered endlessly into Duryodhana's ear, feeding his paranoia and assuring him that the world was rightfully his, provided he was ruthless enough to claim it. The whispers were potent, and the stage was set for the grandest public spectacle of the age, the Rangasthala, the arena demonstration. The massive stadium overflowed with millions, the populace eager to judge the next generation of Kuru rulers. The demonstration began with a storm of martial skill. Bhima showcased his terrifying, primordial strength, smashing iron dummies into dust. The twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, displayed dazzling speed and mastery of all weapons. But it was, predictably, Arjuna who stole the cosmos's attention. He moved through a whirlwind of arrows, shooting targets while blindfolded, splitting seeds suspended in the air, creating a shield of shafts that deflected incoming missiles, feats that defied human capability. The crowd erupted into a roar of ecstasy, declaring him the champion, the future savior of the Kuru clan. Duryodhana stood rigid, his face pale with fury, his humiliation complete and absolute. Just as the court was preparing to shower Arjuna with the highest honors, a new, thunderous sound ripped through the air, the sound of an arrival that defied all expectations and rewrote all destinies. A golden-armored warrior strode into the arena, radiating the terrifying energy of the sun itself, demanding to know if Arjuna had truly demonstrated the pinnacle of archery. This was Karna, the secret son of Kunti, abandoned at birth and raised by a charioteer, a detail known only to the gods, and a secret that underpinned the entire tragedy. He was a flawless mirror of Arjuna, a rival forged by fate itself. Karna declared that he would replicate every single feat performed by Arjuna, and proceeded to do so with an effortless grace that chilled the hearts of the Pandavas. The crowd was utterly split. A counterforce had arrived, an equal and opposite reaction to the Pandavas' glory. But the rules of the aristocracy were ironclad. To duel a prince, one must be a prince. Kripa, the royal preceptor, demanded to know Karna's lineage. Karna, the son of the sun, stood silenced, facing the ultimate caste humiliation of the age. His magnificent skill was meaningless if his bloodline was low. Duryodhana, witnessing this pivot, saw not a low-born man, but the perfect, unstoppable weapon to destroy his cousins. In a stroke of desperate political genius, right there in front of the millions, Duryodhana immediately crowned the charioteer's son the king of Anga, elevating him instantly to royal status. Karna, whose soul longed desperately for acceptance and honor, was instantly and irrevocably bound. He pledged his eternal allegiance, his life, and his incomparable prowess to Duryodhana. The line had been drawn not just by rivalry, but by a debt of honor that could only be repaid with rivers of blood. The two greatest warriors of the age, Arjuna and Karna, were now aligned against each other. The shadow war was over, the final deadly alignment was complete, and the stage was set for the destruction of the world. The alignments were sealed, the alliances carved in blood, but the clock had not yet struck midnight. There was one last, impossible chance for salvation, a final diplomatic Hail Mary thrown by the very architect of the universe, Lord Krishna, the dark-skinned cowherd who held the cosmos in his gaze, chose to walk into the viper's den, not as a god, but as an ambassador of peace. His mission was simple: stop the unstoppable. He journeyed to Hastinapura, knowing that every breath he took in that cursed city was a delay in the inevitable judgment, yet driven by the sacred duty to offer Duryodhana one final path to righteousness, a path away from the gaping maw of Kurukshetra. Krishna spoke with the weight of eternity, his voice calm amidst the feverish court, appealing not to a king's ambition, but to a cousin's sense of duty. He proposed the unthinkable compromise. Give the Pandavas just 5 villages. 5 tiny settlements: Indraprastha, Vrikaprastha, Jayanta, Varanavata, and perhaps one more. A mere speck of land for 5 invincible heroes. This request was not just for territory. It was a final test of Duryodhana's soul and his willingness to heed the counsel of elders like Bhishma and Vidura. But the eldest Kaurava, whose heart was a fortress built of jealousy and entitlement, merely laughed, a cold, brittle sound that echoed the death knell of the Kuru dynasty. He was intoxicated by the sheer number of soldiers he had amassed, and blinded by the presence of legendary, if reluctant, warriors like Bhishma and Drona standing behind him. Duryodhana's reply was the legendary definition of unyielding arrogance, a phrase that would forever be remembered as the moment hope died. "I shall not give them even enough land to stick a needle in." He declared that the Pandavas were weak, that compromise was cowardice, and that only in the ultimate conflict would he find satisfaction. The sheer audacity of rejecting the Lord of the universe sent a tremor through the court. Even Drona and Bhishma, the pillars of the Kaurava defense, looked down in utter despair. They knew that in that moment, the final legal justification for war had been sealed by Duryodhana's own hand, and the cosmic ledger was now irrevocably balanced against them. But Duryodhana's hubris did not end there. In a move of staggering stupidity, he ordered his soldiers to arrest Krishna, the ambassador, right there in the court, believing that capturing the Pandavas' guiding force would cripple their morale. This act of sacrilege was the ultimate transgression against the codes of war and diplomacy. The entire assembly froze. To arrest an envoy was a crime against all known conduct, but to lay hands on Krishna? The atmosphere crackled with suppressed divine energy. Krishna merely smiled, a terrifying, beautiful smile that promised cosmic retribution and the immediate dissolution of all mortal concerns. Then, the transformation. The world fractured. The gentle ambassador vanished, replaced by the terrifying, infinite manifestation of the universal form, the Virat Rupa, a spectacle of overwhelming force that shattered mortal sanity. Suddenly, the court saw not a man, but the entire cosmos residing within his body. The suns and moons were his eyes, the mountains his bones, the gods and demons swirling in his belly. Arjuna's form was seen riding his chariot within Krishna's essence, confirming the intimate bond between the two, while millions of destined warriors rushed toward Krishna's gaping mouths. Blinded and terrified, the Kauravas, especially the evil ones, stumbled back. They realized they were fighting against existence itself. Krishna returned to his human form, his point made with devastating finality. He had offered peace, he had offered mercy, and now he offered only the inescapable fire of war. The mission had failed, and the die was cast. With diplomacy shattered, the focus shifted entirely to mobilization. The armies of the known world began marching towards the sacred plains of Kurukshetra, the field of the Kurus, a massive, flat stretch of land designated by destiny for this apocalyptic purge of righteousness and sin. The scale was terrifying, measured in akshohinis. A single akshohini contained 21,870 chariots, 21,870 elephants, 65,600 horses, and 109,300 foot soldiers. These were not battalions. They were moving cities of death, capable of leveling entire kingdoms.
The Kauravas, through powerful alliances and territorial advantage, managed to amass 11 full Akshohinis, a staggering 2.4 million warriors led by the unconquerable Bhishma and the tactical genius of Drona, a force that seemed mathematically invincible to the human eye.
The Pandavas, relying on the loyalty of their few, powerful allies, notably the Panchalas, Draupadi's people, the Yadavas, Krishna's extended clan, and King Virata, could only muster 7 Akshohinis, a formidable force, but significantly outnumbered by the sheer mass of the enemy. This 11 versus 7 ratio immediately established the tactical challenge for the Pandavas. They could not win through attrition. Their victory depended entirely on superior individual skill, the devastating prowess of Arjuna, and the divine guidance of Krishna, who had sworn not to wield a weapon. Kurukshetra was chosen because it was considered a land of Dharma, ensuring that the warriors who fell there would ascend to heaven regardless of their sins. A final, cruel mercy granted by fate to those forced to fight this horrible war. The Kaurava side, boasting the numerical advantage, appointed the legendary patriarch Bhishma as their supreme commander, the ultimate living symbol of the Kuru dynasty's might and its greatest blunder. He commanded loyalty but was morally compromised, fighting for the side he despised out of the unbreakable bond of his terrible vow. On the Pandava side, they chose Drushtadumna, Draupadi's fierce brother and the prince of Panchala, as their generalissimo. This was a calculated move, for it gave the warrior destined to kill Drona the highest field command, ensuring fierce motivation and immediate acceptance across their diverse ranks. The final night before the battle descended upon the vast camps like a suffocating shroud. Millions of men slept, or tried to, knowing that the next dawn would bring the sound of conch shells signaling the end of the world they knew. Generals like Bhishma and Drona sat in silent anguish, preparing to fight their own students and grandchildren, trapped by duty and the inexorable current of fate. The lines were drawn, the flags were hoisted, and the final, crushing weight of destiny settled over the plains. The stage was set, not just for a war, but for the total collapse of an entire age, witnessed by the silent gods above, waiting for the first drop of blood to stain the sacred soil. The terrible silence that had gripped Hastinapura after the death of Pandu and the blindness of Dhritarashtra was shattered not by war drums, but by the screams of birth, a prelude more horrifying than any battle cry. The curse that began with Bhishma's vow and spiraled through the fractured lineage now sought its physical manifestation in the new generation, forcing the cosmos itself to intervene in the human drama. When the first of these jars finally cracked open, releasing the infant Duryodhana, the portents were not merely bad, they were catastrophic, a cosmic shriek of disaster. Jackals howled, birds rained from the sky, and ancient counselors pleaded with the blind King Dhritarashtra to abandon this child, this living omen, for the sake of the Kuru clan. But the love of a father, even a blind one, is a terrifying force, a shield against all reason, and Dhritarashtra dismissed the warnings, sealing the fate of the known world with a single arrogant refusal. Meanwhile, the 5 rightful heirs, the Pandavas, were born of celestial grace, sons of the gods themselves, lending them a divine aura that magnified their rivals' jealousy. Yudhishthira, the anchor of Dharma, born of the god of justice; Bhima, the mountainous strength, son of the wind god Vayu, possessing the raw, earth-shaking power of 1,000 elephants; and Arjuna, the unmatched archer, the perfect warrior, direct progeny of Indra, king of the heavens. These 5 boys, with their younger brothers, arrived at Hastinapura like bolts of lightning, a sudden, blinding contrast to the 100 pale, spoiled sons of the blind king. The moment they stepped onto the hallowed ground of the palace, the rivalry ignited, not slowly, but instantaneously, an acidic reaction between light and shadows that could never be neutralized. We are told of the poisoned food, the snakes deployed, the attempts to drown Bhima in the Ganga, not childish pranks, but miniature acts of treason perfected in the nursery. The blind king, perpetually paralyzed by his love for his son, consistently failed to mete out justice, allowing the weeds of malice to grow into impenetrable thickets of hatred. This systemic failure of leadership became the bedrock upon which the war would ultimately be built. Then came the guru, Dronacharya, a Brahmin of formidable, even terrifying martial knowledge, the ultimate master of weaponry. Drona entered the Kuru court driven by a profound need for revenge against his former friend, King Drupada, and he brought with him a skill set that promised to create the most lethal warriors the world had ever seen. He was meant to be the unifying force, the educator, but Drona was a man of fierce biases. He saw the pure, unparalleled talent of Arjuna, the perfect student, and poured all his knowledge, all his secret weapons, into him, virtually ignoring the others. This favoritism only fueled the toxic resentment simmering within Duryodhana and his 100 brothers, who felt perpetually secondary. The injustice was amplified when the story of Ekalavya unfolded, the self-taught tribal prince who mastered archery better than Arjuna himself by using an idol of Drona as his guru. In a display of chilling, cold-blooded loyalty to Arjuna, Drona demanded Ekalavya's right thumb as Guru Dakshina, teacher's fee, crippling the brilliant archer simply to ensure Arjuna remained the undisputed best in the world. This act solidified Drona's role not just as a teacher, but as a prejudiced agent of the establishment, further legitimizing the Kaurawas' belief that the system was rigged against them, even as they themselves practiced the darkest arts of deceit. The stage was now perfectly tilted toward disaster. The true turning point, the injection of pure chaos into the fragile balance, occurred during the grand display of skill, the princely tournament held before the entire Kuru nation. Arjuna was magnificent, flawless, completing every impossible task Drona had set, proving his cosmic birthright. The crowd roared, the Pandavas triumphed, and Duryodhana fumed in impotent rage, watching his entire future evaporate in the face of his cousin's perfection. But just as the dust settled, a figure stepped into the arena, a warrior cloaked in a radiance that rivaled the sun, possessing skill that matched Arjuna's arrow for arrow, challenge for challenge. This was Karna, the supposed son of a simple charioteer, but clearly a man of divine lineage, burning with raw, untamed power and a deep underlying humiliation about his unknown parentage. When Kripacharya demanded that Karna, being a charioteer's son, Sutaputra, was too low-born to duel a prince of the Kuru dynasty, the social hierarchy was exposed as a brutal, unforgiving machine. It was precisely at this moment that Duryodhana, in an act of breathtaking political genius and cynical manipulation, stepped forward. He did not care for honor, only for power. He instantly crowned Karna the king of Anga, giving him the royal status he needed to fight Arjuna, and in doing so, he purchased a weapon of catastrophic proportions.
He forged an unbreakable bond of loyalty with Karna, a warrior whose power was second only to Arjuna's, a bond built on shared resentment and mutual ambition.
Karna became the 101st Kaurava, the ultimate dark twin to Arjuna, destined to meet him in a fatal confrontation. The alliance was sealed. The blind king's son, the master strategist of malice, now had the perfect executor of violence. The fate of the Kuru clan was no longer in the hands of the ancestors or the gods, but in the hands of 6 young men bound by rivalry and the inescapable chains of birth.
The princes, having completed their education, were now fully formed weapons, loaded and ready to fire. The first real attempt to eliminate the Pandavas and seize the throne came not on a battlefield, but in the construction of a beautiful yet terrifying dwelling, the infamous House of Lac, the Varnavata Palace, designed by Duryodhana to burn the Pandavas alive, turning their divine heritage to ash. This was no longer politics. It was premeditated mass murder, sanctioned by the silent compliance of the ruling power. The clock of destruction was ticking rapidly toward the moment when the Pandavas would be forced to flee into the wilderness, their lives hanging by a thread, marking the final, irreparable schism of the Kuru dynasty and the beginning of their long, agonizing journey toward annihilation. The smoke still choked their lungs, the acrid smell of burning lac a terrifying reminder of the malice that hunted them, even in the presumed safety of their own family. They had crawled out of the fiery death trap engineered by Duryodhana, emerging not as kings but as ragged, desperate fugitives, their royal identities hidden beneath the disguise of impoverished Brahmins, their souls scarred by betrayal. The Kuru princes, once accustomed to the gilded halls of Hastinapura, were now forced to flee into the deep, suffocating expanse of the Kamyaka forest, a wilderness teeming with dangers far more real and immediate than the political machinations they had left behind. This was the beginning of the crucial period known as the Vana Parva, the forest dwelling, an agonizing 13-year sentence that would either break the Pandavas entirely or temper them into weapons ready for cosmic war. They were stripped of everything, power, wealth, comfort, but they clung fiercely to the one thing the Kauravas could not steal, their impeccable Dharma and the belief in inevitable justice. Their first weeks were defined by crushing hunger. How could the sons of the Kuru dynasty, meant to rule the world, even find enough food to feed themselves, let alone the loyal entourage of priests and servants who refused to abandon them? Yudhishthira, the embodiment of righteousness, felt the weight of this starvation most acutely. His Dharma demanded he protect all those under his care, yet his earthly means were non-existent. It was in this moment of utter despair, when the great Bhima's strength was sapped by hunger and Draupadi's spirit faltered, that the divine intervened, not with armies, but with sustenance. Yudhishthira prayed with a purity unmatched to Surya, the glory of sun god, the supreme source of life and energy. His devotion was rewarded instantly. Surya appeared, radiating light, and gifted the eldest Pandava, the Akshaya Patra, the inexhaustible vessel. This miraculous aid allowed them to survive the initial shock of exile, but mere survival was a temporary victory. To truly reclaim their destiny, they needed power that transcended the mortal realm, the kind of strength that could stand against Bhishma, Drona, and the endless legions of the Kaurava army. The time had come for the greatest archer, Arjuna,
to elevate his skill beyond anything Drona had taught him. He was tasked with a pilgrimage of unimaginable difficulty, seeking celestial weapons guided by the wisdom of the sage Vyasa. Arjuna left the Kamyaka forest, leaving his brothers and Draupadi behind, and journeyed alone into the treacherous, snow-choked peaks of the Himalayas, the abode of the gods, to perform the ultimate penance. His goal was singular, audacious, and terrifying: to acquire the Pashupatastra, the irresistible, catastrophic weapon wielded by Lord Shiva himself, the destroyer of the universe. This quest required tapasya, severe asceticism that tested not just his body but his very soul. He stood motionless for weeks, enduring freezing cold and scorching heat, meditating relentlessly, shedding his mortal arrogance one agonizing day at a time. The path to divine power is never simple, and Shiva does not grant his ultimate weapon merely to the skilled or the brave. He grants it only to the absolutely worthy. Arjuna's final test arrived disguised in the most unexpected form: a rude, menacing Kirata, a tribal hunter, who challenged Arjuna over the kill of a massive boar. The two warriors clashed furiously. Arrows flew, bows snapped, and their battle raged with such elemental force that the very mountains seemed to tremble. Arjuna was fighting not just a man, but an embodiment of raw, untamed nature, and despite all his skill, he found himself matched, and then, slowly, utterly defeated. Humiliated, but acknowledging the sheer superiority of his opponent, Arjuna bowed in reverence, praying to Shiva for strength. As he offered flowers to the image of the deity, he noticed the same blossoms miraculously appearing on the head of the Kirata hunter. The mask dropped. The hunter revealed his true, magnificent form: Shiva, pleased beyond measure by Arjuna's lack of ego, his courage, and his fighting spirit even in defeat. Arjuna had passed the test of humility and strength. The reward was seismic. Shiva personally initiated Arjuna and granted him the Pashupatastra, a weapon of such cataclysmic potential that he was instructed only to use it against forces of utter evil, never in anger or pride. But the gifts did not end there. Arjuna then ascended to Swarga, the heaven of Indra, his celestial father, where he spent 5 years undergoing intensive military training from the gods themselves, mastering countless other divine weapons, including the thunderbolts and the terrifying Varunastra. While Arjuna was literally ascending to become an invincible god warrior, the remaining Pandavas in the forest were navigating a different kind of trial: the intellectual and spiritual gauntlet of Dharma, facing demons, sages, and moral paradoxes designed to keep their ethical compass true. These years were forging the steel of their resolve, transforming them from merely exiled princes into the chosen instruments of cosmic balancing, preparing them for the day when the thunder of Arjuna's celestial arrows would announce their fiery, inevitable return. The exile was over, but the Cold War was just beginning. The 5 Pandava princes, Yudhisthira, the anchor of Dharma; Bhima, the mountainous embodiment of strength; Arjuna, the celestial archer; and the twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, were returned to the glittering, poisoned halls of Hastinapura. But they were not welcomed guests. They were ticking time bombs of legitimacy, ready to detonate Duryodhana's fragile claim to the throne.
The moment they stepped across the threshold, the air thickened with lethal jealousy. King Dhritarashtra, blinded by both love and literal darkness, made the fateful decision to educate all 105 boys together, ensuring that the rivalry would not merely simmer, but would boil over in the crucible of training. This decision brought forth two legends whose skill would define the next generation: Kripacharya, the royal preceptor, and his brother-in-law Dronacharya, the master of all celestial weapons and warfare, a man whose heart was consumed by a desperate need for vengeance against an ancient slight. Dronacharya was a Brahmana steeped in divine knowledge, yet driven by a powerful, almost tragic need for vengeance against the Panchala king, Drupada. He sought a disciple who could execute his destiny, a weapon capable of humbling a sovereign nation, and in the sharp-eyed, impossibly focused Arjuna, he found his perfect vessel. Drona did not teach just techniques. He imparted secrets, the esoteric knowledge that transformed a common soldier into a mythical warrior capable of summoning meteorological disasters with a mere word. He saw in Arjuna not just talent, but the capacity for absolute, unwavering dedication, the singular focus that could pierce the eye of a turning bird or summon the most devastating astral weapons known to creation. While Duryodhana excelled in mace fighting, driven by sheer muscle and malice, and Bhima's strength was a terrifying natural force born of the wind god Vayu, Arjuna was the intellectual of combat, mastering every bow, every formation, and every mystical mantra necessary for a kshatriya of cosmic destiny. The gulf between the cousins was widening daily, etched not just in bloodline, but in raw, undeniable skill and ethical character. The Kauravas learned warfare. The Pandavas mastered Dharma, the inescapable righteousness that defined their very existence and made them intolerable to their envious cousins. The public display of prowess only magnified the disparity, turning Duryodhana's jealousy into a corrosive acid that ate away at his soul. He watched the crowds roar for Arjuna, whose arrow precision defied mortal understanding, and heard the murmurs of the people who knew the true heir to the throne was not the blind king's son, but the righteous son of Pandu. This public validation was the final, unforgivable insult that paved the way for murder. But the drama of the training grounds needed an accelerant, a figure whose destiny was so tragically intertwined with the primary conflict that his very existence would guarantee destruction. That figure stormed onto the stage not as a prince, but as a charioteer's son, Karna, the mysterious warrior whose true lineage was a secret guarded by the sun itself. He possessed skill so dazzling, so inherently divine, having been born with golden armor and earrings, that he could challenge even Arjuna's celestial gifts. Karna carried the twin curses of his unknown royal lineage and his unbreakable, desperate loyalty to the one man who acknowledged him, Duryodhana. When Karna strode into the arena during the grand demonstration, demanding to compete with Arjuna in a duel to the death, the assembled court and the thousands of spectators gasped in disbelief and shock. Here was a man who looked like a king, fought like a god, but was designated a low-caste outcast by the rigid societal laws of the era. Bhima and Kripa immediately questioned his right to duel a Kuru prince, citing the inviolable rules of caste hierarchy. This was the pivotal moment. Humiliated and furious, Karna was about to be driven away, his destiny seemingly curtailed by birth, when Duryodhana, with chilling political genius, intervened. He did not defend Karna's skill. He simply crowned him king of Anga on the spot, instantly elevating him to the necessary royal status, transforming an outcast into a political ally of catastrophic potential. The Dark Alliance was sealed, cemented by mutual hatred for Arjuna and a shared ambition for the throne. The alliance between Duryodhana and Karna was forged in mutual scorn and ambition, a partnership that would become the unbreakable cornerstone of the Kaurava war machine. Duryodhana gained an invincible shield and a loyal friend who could stand toe-to-toe with his greatest rival, and Karna gained the status and validation denied to him by the world that rejected his mysterious birth. This act solidified the internal division of Hastinapura. It was no longer a simple family rivalry, it was a political faction, the Pandavas representing righteousness and legitimacy, and the Kauravas embodying entitlement, envy, and raw power backed by the lethal loyalty of the son's son. Even the great Bhishma, the patriarch, could only watch, paralyzed by his ancient vow, as the seeds of war sprouted into deadly saplings in the very courtyard where he had once ruled with unchallenged authority. The training ended not with harmony, but with the palpable certainty that these young men were destined to meet again, not as students, but as enemies on the smoke-choked battlefield. Duryodhana, unable to tolerate Bhima's physical dominance or Yudhishthira's moral authority, plotted to eliminate the strongest of them. He organized a sumptuous feast on the banks of the Ganga, lacing a specific, heavily spiced portion of food intended for the perpetually ravenous Bhima with a potent, paralyzing poison capable of killing an elephant in moments. But Bhima was protected by destiny itself and by a heritage far older than the Kuru house. Sinking to the bottom, he landed fatefully in the kingdom of the Nagas, serpents, ruled by Vasaki. The extremely potent venom of the Nagas, naturally attracted to the foreign poison in Bhima's system, rushed to neutralize the toxins, essentially curing him while simultaneously fortifying his physical constitution with superhuman resilience, granting him the strength of 10,000 elephants. He returned after 8 days, having drunk the elixir of immortality from the Naga wells, bursting back into the palace, stronger, angrier, and utterly aware of his cousin's murderous intent. The attempt failed, but the message was delivered. Duryodhana would stop at nothing to claim the throne, transforming the innocent palace into a graveyard of ethics. The sheer audacity of the attempt shocked the elders, but still no definitive action was taken against the Kauravas. Dhritarashtra merely issued weak reprimands, his blind affection for his son paralyzing the entire kingdom's justice system, allowing injustice to flourish. This incident officially marked the end of their shared childhood and the absolute beginning of outright political warfare. The Pandavas understood that their presence in Hastinapura was a constant mortal danger. The game had moved from competitive sport to assassination. The next phase of the tragedy would involve shifting the venue of conflict, moving the Pandavas far away from the center of power, only to prepare a trap even more elaborate and deadly than the Ganga's dark depths. A horrific scheme that would be known only as the House of Lac. The air in Varnavata was thick with the scent of treachery, a sickly sweet perfume of resin and dried oil. Duryodhana had engineered a masterpiece of malice, a palace that looked like a monument of peace, but was, in reality, a funeral pyre waiting for a spark. The Pandavas, still reeling from the political manipulation that stripped them of their birthright, were housed in this magnificent death trap, the infamous House of Lac. The architect of this doom was the villainous Porochana, a man whose soul was as dark and flammable as the materials he used. Every wall, every beam, every piece of ornate furniture had been meticulously crafted from lac, oil, ghee, and other highly combustible materials, disguised cunningly beneath layers of beautiful plaster and gold leaf. They were meant to settle in, feel safe, and then, in the suffocating darkness of a calculated night, they would vanish in a blaze so hot the very evidence of their murder would turn to ash, allowing Duryodhana to claim the throne without a single rival breathing down his neck. But the gods, or perhaps just the sheer, terrifying weight of Dharma, always send a warning. This time, the whisper came from the incorruptible heart of the Kuru dynasty, the wise and often ignored Vidura. He communicated the deadly truth to Yudhishthira in a coded language only they understood, a cryptic warning about a forest fire that consumes everything in its path, signaling the true nature of their luxurious prison. Alerted to their peril, the Pandavas did not panic. They became shadows in their own home, quietly digging a secret subterranean tunnel, a rat hole to freedom, while feigning total ignorance and trust in Purochana's hospitality. The tension was excruciating. They knew the moment Purochana decided they were comfortable enough, the fire would come. And it did. One night, under the cold, silent scrutiny of the stars, the assassin Purochana set the magnificent death trap alight. The heat was instantaneous, an explosion of pure, desperate flame that licked the sky and screamed the truth of Duryodhana's hatred to the entire world. But when the palace collapsed, reducing the symbol of Hastinapura's false peace to rubble, the Pandavas were already gone, having executed their escape through the tunnel, leaving the body of Porochana and a tribal woman with her 5 sons accidentally trapped in the blaze to be mistakenly identified as the slain Kunti and her boys. They had escaped the fire, yes, but they had fallen into the infinite, perilous unknown, the deep jungle. They were stripped of their royal identity, hunted, exhausted, and constantly moving under the cover of night. Kunti, the mother, bore the brunt of this sudden, terrible exile, often collapsing from exhaustion, only to be miraculously carried by the sheer, terrifying strength of Bhima, the mightiest of the brothers. It was in this unforgiving darkness that they encountered their next, immediate challenge, a primal, horrifying force that transcended human malice. They stumbled into the territory of the Rakshasas, the man-eating demons. Specifically, they faced the terrifying Hidimba, a monstrous cannibal whose very presence curdled the blood. He smelled the human flesh and prepared for a feast. But before Hidimba could strike, his sister, Hidimbi, saw Bhima, and in a twist of fate that only the cosmos could script, she fell instantly, hopelessly in love with the gigantic warrior. She warned the Pandavas of her brother's approach. Hidimba arrived in a towering fury, not just at the trespassers, but at his sister's betrayal. After the bloody victory, and after much pleading from Hidimbi, Yudhishthira reluctantly allowed Bhima to marry her, but only under the sacred condition that they would part as soon as a son was born, a son who would eventually become the legendary, flying Ghatotkacha. The Pandavas continued their journey, disguising themselves as poor Brahmins, begging for alms, constantly looking over their shoulders. They had to rebuild their influence from nothing, starting with anonymity. Their path led them, guided by destiny and the timely counsel of Vyasa himself, toward the powerful kingdom of Panchala, where King Drupada was preparing the Swayamvara, self-choice ceremony, for his daughter, the astonishingly beautiful and brilliant Draupadi Panchali.
Drupada, who harbored a fierce, burning hatred for Drona, the Pandavas' teacher, desperately sought an alliance with a warrior powerful enough to challenge the Kuru throne, and he knew Draupadi's marriage was the key.
The assembly of kings was a spectacle of vanity and ambition. Every ruler in the known world, including the humiliated Duryodhana and the mighty, radiant Karna, had gathered to compete for the ultimate prize, the hand of Panchali. The challenge was simple, yet seemingly impossible. String a colossal, specialized bow and shoot an arrow through a tiny target hanging high overhead, using only the reflection of the target in a pool of water below. One by one, the greatest kings failed, their pride humbled by the sheer weight of the bow. Karna stepped forward, ready to claim victory, until Draupadi herself, with chilling clarity and royal defiance, declared, "I will not marry a Suta, charioteer's son." The humiliation was profound, and the rift between Karna and the Pandavas widened instantly, fueled by this public insult. Just as hope seemed lost, a young Brahmin stood up. It was Arjuna, still disguised, yet radiating an undeniable, lethal focus. He walked to the bow, offered prayers, and without a tremor, strung the massive weapon. He focused entirely on the reflection, bypassing the distraction of the physical target above, and released the arrow. It flew true, piercing the mark with a sound that echoed like a thunderclap, signaling the instantaneous return of the Pandavas to the world stage. The kings erupted in chaos. How could a mere starving Brahmin succeed where the greatest warriors had failed? Arjuna was swarmed by envious and angry rulers, forcing Bhima and the others to drop their Brahmin disguises and fight to protect their brother's claim. They brought Draupadi home, triumphant but cautious, to their temporary dwelling. Kunti was inside, tending to their meager dinner. Arjuna called out, "Mother, look what we have brought home today." Kunti, without even turning to look, believing they had brought back alms or food, declared the single most disastrous instruction in the entire epic. "Whatever you have gained, share it equally among the 5 of you." The words were final, the command absolute. A mother's word could not be retracted. Thus, Draupadi, the princess of Panchala, the flame-born beauty, was bound to become the shared wife of the 5 Pandava brothers, a decision that cemented their uniqueness, violated social norms, and ensured that the seeds of scandal and future war would be plentifully sown in the fertile, bloody ground of Hastinapura. The fire of Varnavata had failed to destroy them, but the accidental vow of Kunti had just bound their destinies together in an inescapable, magnificent tragedy. The ground had swallowed them whole, or so the Kauravas believed, celebrating their fiery victory at Varnavata. But the Pandavas were not ashes. They were ghosts walking among the mortals. Kunti cloaked in rags, her 5 sons hidden behind the humble veneer of wandering ascetics, surviving by their wits and carrying the silent, burning weight of their royal birthright. They were waiting for the cosmic signal to reclaim the stage, for the moment when fate would turn the tables on their ruthless cousins. That signal arrived not in a flash of lightning, but in the magnificent, terrifying spectacle of a princess's choice, the Swayamvara of Draupadi, the fire-born daughter of King Drupada of Panchala. This was not a mere wedding ceremony. It was a lethal public challenge designed by the gods and executed by men to unmask the greatest warrior in the known universe, a test of archery so impossible it bent the very rules of physics. Every king, every prince, every legend in Bharatavarsha was present, draped in the arrogant confidence of power, their retinues stretching for miles, eager to claim the stunning prize. But the target, a rotating fish image viewed only through the shimmering reflection in a pool of water, mocked their attempts, defying the skill of even the most acclaimed archers. One by one, the mighty failed, their egos shattered like glass against the impossibility of the task, leaving Drupada sinking into despair. Then, from the unnoticed crowd of Brahmins, stepped Arjuna, the third son of Pandu, his bow hand itching with the memory of past glories and the urgency of destiny. He was a pauper in appearance, his identity masked by ash and threadbare robes, but when he approached that mighty sacred bow, the very air around him cracked and hissed with forgotten royalty, announcing his true nature to any entity capable of recognizing divine prowess. In a heartbeat, he sighted the reflection, pulled the string taut with impossible strength, released the arrow with the swift precision of a hawk, and the impossible became devastating fact. The target was pierced, Draupadi was won, and the silence that fell over the assembly was the deafening sound of a dynastic earthquake beginning in the depths of Hastinapura. The disguise was shredded instantly. The world now knew. The Pandavas were not only alive, resurrected from the ashes of a political assassination attempt, but they were now glorious, successful, and irrevocably backed by the formidable military might of Panchala. But the drama was only just beginning, because Kunti, in a moment of maternal exhaustion and blind habit, uttered the decree that would define the next generation of war, cementing the tragedy laid down by the ancestors. "My sons, whatever alms you have brought today, share it equally among yourselves," she commanded, not realizing that the alms they had secured was the most beautiful, fiercely independent, and fate-altering woman in the entire world. News traveled faster than a war drum, carried by terrified spies and gleeful messengers, reaching the ears of the Kaurava regime in Hastinapura. Duryodhana erupted in a storm of predictable, blinding rage that threatened to level the palace itself. His cousins were not only alive, they were allied with Drupada, a powerful king who held an ancient, deep-seated, and politically dangerous grudge against Drona, and, by extension, the entire Kuru establishment. The time for outright, covert extermination had passed. The time for strategic, venomous compromise, a false form of peace designed to delay the inevitable, had arrived like a creeping sickness. Under immense political pressure and the unwavering moral counsel of Vidura, King Dhritarashtra, paralyzed and blinded by his overwhelming paternal affection for his own reckless son, made the only move he dared. He divided the kingdom. It was a classic, poisoned offer steeped in malicious intent. The Kauravas retained the glorious, established capital of Hastinapura and the rich, fertile land surrounding it, the heart of the Kuru Empire's wealth. The Pandavas, on the other hand, were granted Khandavaprastha. Now, that name sounds grand, but it was, in reality, a desolate, snake-infested wilderness, an arid wasteland on the banks of the Yamuna, a land they were fully expected to fail in, a sarcastic consolation prize designed to keep them far from the true beating heart of power. This was Duryodhana's final petty attempt to exile them permanently through the weapon of geography, ensuring they spent their lives fighting the jungle instead of the throne. But the Pandavas, fueled by Draupadi's fierce resolve, the divine engineering genius of Krishna, who now moved into the narrative as their supreme, infallible advisor, accepted the challenge not with resignation, but with revolutionary spiritual zeal. They called upon the celestial architect, Vishwakarma, and together they began the monumental, impossible task of conquering the wilderness. They did not just clear the land. They forced the jungle to retreat. They mastered the capricious rivers, and they raised a city that eclipsed the glory and magnificence of old Hastinapura. Indraprastha, the city of Indra, rose from the ashes of the desert, a marvel of advanced architecture and visionary urban planning, a defiant statement of their sovereignty, radiating power and divine favor across the continent. It was a capital city built entirely on resilience, a fortress of Dharma, and its very existence became a knife twisted daily in the heart of Duryodhana, proving that even in the most absolute exile, the Pandavas were destined for monumental greatness. Their transformation of Pandavaprastha cemented their legitimacy, drawing the eyes of the entire world towards this new, glittering center of power, establishing them as not merely claimants to a ruined throne, but as successful, independent, and divinely sanctioned rulers. The peace, however, was merely a thin, fragile sheet of ice over the boiling lava of rivalry.